Imagine spending 20 years of your life as the star student of the greatest thinker in the world, only to build your entire legacy by proving him wrong. Well, that's pretty much the story of Aristotle. He's the student who challenged his master, and in doing so, ended up shaping the next 2,000 years of Western thought.
You've probably heard this quote before. It's one of his most famous, and it's really the perfect place to start because it gets right to the heart of his entire philosophy. See, for Aristotle, truth wasn't something you found in some far-off, abstract world of ideas. Nope, it was right here, in the real, concrete, repeated actions of our everyday lives. So who was this man who brought philosophy crashing down to earth?
For 2 whole decades, Aristotle was Plato's most brilliant pupil at the legendary academy in Athens. But this isn't a simple story of a student taking over for the master. This was a story of a full-blown intellectual rebellion. Aristotle would take the very foundation his master had built and turn it completely on its head, arguing for a totally new way of seeing, well, everything.
So let's just quickly walk through his life, because it's pretty wild. He was born in 384 BC, and his dad was a doctor, which is key. He was trained from day one to observe the natural world. Then at 17, he moves to Athens and spends the next 20 years at Plato's academy. And then he gets a pretty unique gig, tutoring the kid who would become Alexander the Great. After Alexander starts his conquest, Aristotle heads back to Athens and founds his own school, the Lyceum, a direct rival to Plato's. But things take a turn. When Alexander dies, Aristotle's Macedonian connections make him a target in Athens. He's hit with a bogus charge of impiety, so he flees, saying, and you gotta love this, that he would not let Athens sin against philosophy twice, a clear shot at what happened to Socrates.
Okay, so what was this huge rebellion all about? Well, it all boils down to one fundamental question. Where do we actually find truth? And this whole disagreement is perfectly, and I mean perfectly, captured in that famous painting by Raphael, The School of Athens. You've got Plato, the master, pointing up to the heavens, to the world of ideas. And right next to him is Aristotle, the student, gesturing firmly down, towards the earth. That single gesture, it's not just a detail in a painting, it's the most famous summary of the biggest debate in the history of Western philosophy. So for Plato, ultimate reality, the perfect idea of a chair or the perfect idea of justice, it all existed in some higher non-physical world of forms. Our world, the one we see and touch, was just a pale, imperfect shadow of that. But Aristotle, he just wasn't buying it. He argued there is only one world, this one right here. The true essence of a thing isn't floating around in another dimension, it's right here inside the thing itself. And this is the absolute key takeaway. For Plato, you gain knowledge by looking inward, using pure reason. For Aristotle, knowledge has to start by looking outward, by using your senses to observe the world around you.
All right, so if you're going to make a huge claim like truth is found in the physical world, you can't just say it. You need a rock-solid system for actually observing and analyzing that world. You need a toolkit for reality, and that is exactly what Aristotle built. He basically invented the very instruments we use for rational thinking.
His first, and you could argue his most important tool, was logic. He didn't just use logic, he organized it. He systematized it for the first time. And the beating heart of his system is the syllogism. It's like a recipe for building a completely sound, totally waterproof argument.
Here's the classic example everyone learns. You start with a big general truth. All humans are mortal. Okay, check. Then you add a specific, undeniable fact. Socrates is a human. Check. Well, if those first two things are true, then the conclusion is absolutely inescapable. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. This simple structure is the engine of rational thought. It allows us to move logically from what we already know to what we can prove.
But logic was just one tool in the kit. To really understand anything, whether it's a tree or a person or a statue, Aristotle said you needed to be able to answer 4 fundamental questions about it. This amazing framework is known as the 4 causes.
Let's just use a statue as an example to see how this works. The material cause is simple. What's it made of? Marble. The formal cause is its shape or structure, the form of a person. The efficient cause is what brought it into being, the sculptor. And then the final cause, and this one is a huge concept for Aristotle, is its purpose, its reason for being, what he called its telos. In this case, its purpose is to be a work of art. For Aristotle, everything in nature has a telos, an ultimate purpose, and you can't truly understand something until you understand what it's for.
So we have these incredibly powerful tools for understanding the world. But Aristotle didn't just stop there. He took that same rigorous, systematic approach and applied it to one of the biggest questions we can ask. How do you live a good life?
For him, ethics wasn't about some vague, fuzzy feelings. It was a practical science.
The ultimate goal, he says, is something called eudaimonia. Now, this word often gets translated as happiness, but honestly, that's a terrible translation. It's so much bigger than that. It's about human flourishing, about reaching your absolute full potential, living a life of true meaning and excellence. It's not a mood you feel, it's a state you achieve through your actions.
So how do we achieve this flourishing life? By practicing virtue. And Aristotle's most famous idea here is the golden mean. He argued that every virtue is actually the perfect balance point, the sweet spot between two vices, a vice of having too little of something and a vice of having too much. Take courage, for example. The deficiency, too little, is cowardice. The excess, too much, is recklessness. Real courage is the virtue that lies right there in the middle. It's not about being mediocre, it's about hitting the absolute peak of excellence. And this brings us right back to where we started this whole conversation. How do you find that golden mean? How do you become a courageous person, or a just person, or a generous person? Through practice, through habit. You aren't just born brave, you become brave by doing brave things over and over again. Your character isn't something you have, it's something you build, one action at a time. Excellence is not an act, but a habit.
You know, it is almost impossible to overstate Aristotle's influence on the world. For centuries after he died, people just called him the philosopher. That was it. But what's really fascinating is that his most profound, game-changing works nearly vanished from history altogether.
See, Aristotle had two sets of writings. He had his polished, public dialogues, and then he had his dense, internal lecture notes, the really deep stuff. For a long time, all people really knew were his public works, which, to be honest, sounded a lot like Plato. It was only when his deeper, more radical lecture notes were rediscovered and published in the 1st century BC that the world finally saw the true, revolutionary scope of his thinking. And what a scope it was! I mean, the guy didn't just contribute to fields. In many cases, he basically created them from scratch. He gave us the very system of logic we still use. He was the first great biologist, meticulously classifying hundreds of animals. He analyzed governments in a way that essentially founded political science. His framework for ethics is still one of the dominant ways we think about morality. He systematized rhetoric, metaphysics. I mean, the list is just staggering.
His ideas became the absolute bedrock for Islamic philosophy during its golden age. Later, they were woven into Christian theology by thinkers like St. Thomas Aquinas, fundamentally shaping the intellectual world of the Middle Ages. And his relentless focus on empirical observation, on looking at the world and categorizing what you see, that laid the essential groundwork for the scientific method itself.
So in the end, Aristotle's great rebellion was to drag philosophy out of the clouds and ground it right here in the real, observable world. He gave us the tools to analyze it, a framework for how to live well within it, and a legacy that helped build the modern mind. Which really just leaves us with a final question to chew on. In our age of algorithms and digital realities, what does his core instruction to observe the world truly mean for us right now?